Before getting to the stories, I'd just like to thank everyone who's recently joined the channel. I appreciate everyone who stopped by to offer encouragement or feedback. Also, if you're looking for more weird stories, consider checking out some of my other videos. Ever wonder how frogs, fruit flies, and even doorstops could save the day? Now you don't have to. And without further ado, let's get to this week's installment. My sister Caitlin is only 2 years older than me, and we were always close growing up. We'd frequently get into mischief together, and maybe for that reason, we always liked to go on adventures. My senior year of high school was her sophomore year at the University of Tulsa, and we decided to take a trip to see one of our mutual friends who'd moved away to Arkansas. It'd be about a 5-hour road trip, though because of our schedules and the fact that our friend wouldn't want us to arrive super late, we'd have to spend the night somewhere. Therefore, we made plans to stay in this smaller town in Arkansas. I honestly can't remember the name. We got a room at a Motel 6, and since it was only like 8 o'clock, we drove around a little. There was kind of a town square, a Walmart, a movie theater, and a bar or two, but what caught our eye was a lit up sign that said bowling alley. Kate and I hadn't been bowling since I was like 8, so we decided it would be a fun experience. When we pulled off the road and into the parking lot, I noticed the bowling alley was essentially deserted. There was only one car that we could see, which I assumed belonged to an employee. The bowling alley was medium-sized, I'd say, and as we walked to the front doors, I noticed the white stucco exterior was dilapidated. There was an unusual odor as well, though I'm not sure what it was. Kate and I stepped through the automatic doors and were greeted with a dimly lit interior and another, somewhat off-putting, smell. I don't think we were quite sketched out at that point, though we did start joking about how this place gave us eerie vibes. We walked over to the counter where some guy around my same age was just standing up and looking downward. I'm not sure if he had a phone or not, but he didn't look up until we greeted him. I think he might have had something going on, which didn't really bother me or Kate, and after we got our bowling shoes and picked a lane, we sat down at the score machine and came up with funny names for ourselves. Between putting the bumpers up and bouncing our balls off of them, and watching the animations play, we were having a pretty good time. I will say it was a bit strange seeing the other 30 or so lanes completely empty. Around 9:45, the guy who had been at the counter walked right up to our lane, and when I say walked up, I mean he literally stopped 5 feet behind Kate. We'd just been laughing about something, but when she noticed him, she jumped. The guy didn't appear to acknowledge her reaction at all though, and instead just told us that they'd be closing in 15 minutes. I think we both expected him to say more, but instead he just turned around and walked away, presumably back to the counter. Kate and I smiled at each other and laughed, joking about what just happened. We had like 3 frames left in a game that we were trying to play somewhat legitimately, so we decided to finish it real quick. 10 minutes later we were done, and we walked back to the counter as I was enjoying my victory over my older sister. The guy wasn't there, so we just left the shoes at the counter and headed for the front doors since we'd already paid earlier. But this is where one of the most terrifying moments of our lives began. Kate got to the front doors a second before I did, and when she pushed on the door, it didn't open. She tried the other one, but it didn't open either. She started to freak out a bit, and when I tried both pushing and pulling both of the doors, low-key, I did too. Did that guy at the counter just forget we were still in the building? Or did he not care? Kate and I both started shouting, "Hello," and "Can you unlock the doors?" but no one answered. I looked back at the counter, but the dude wasn't there. I was about to walk in there when the entire bowling alley was plunged into darkness. Kate screamed, and honestly, I'm not sure how I didn't. We both shouted louder for someone to let us out. When that didn't work, we turned on the lights on our iPhones and shined them around inside the bowling alley. We didn't see or hear anything aside from a very faint mechanical hum. I told Kate to stay close as I walked behind the counter and into the employees only section. There were racks of shoes as well as spare bowling balls and pins, a desk with this really old computer, and a filing cabinet. The guy wasn't in sight. Now we were genuinely creeped out, and neither I nor Kate wanted to spend another moment in that building. But right when we walked back through the door, Kate dropped her phone and screamed. I ran beside her and shined my light in the direction she had been looking. I didn't see anything, but what Kate said next made my blood run cold. She told me that someone was standing at the end of one of the bowling lanes furthest away from us. Even though I didn't see anyone, because of the situation, I was low-key terrified already, so I didn't challenge what she said. The realization that this was happening in a bowling alley in the middle of nowhere was also sinking in, and we were both almost panicking. We frantically tried the doors again, to no avail. It seemed like we'd either have to smash our way out or try to find another exit. I didn't really want to break one of the windows in the doors, but that honestly seemed better than going further into the alley to find another way out. I didn't want to call for the employee again, so I did one last 180 with my flashlight, and then I screamed as well. By the bathrooms, on the far side of the alley, was a man. I couldn't make things out exactly, but it looked like he was wearing a dark-colored hoodie and sweatpants. Even from far away, he looked taller than the employee, so I figured it wasn't him. Kate started screaming as well, and that was the last bit of encouragement I needed to quickly grab a bowling ball from the closest lane and smash the window. I continued to do so, trying to make a hole big enough for me and Kate to crawl through without getting cut. Then, to my horror, I heard footsteps slowly coming towards us. I told Kate to pick up a ball to defend herself and to keep her light on the guy as I finished bashing out a hole. A few seconds later, I turned around to see the man had come halfway towards us. He didn't say anything, but I could make out his face now, and it was terrifying. He looked to be in his 30s and had long, wiry hair along with a mustache. The man was grinning and his eyes were insane. Finally, I thought the hole was big enough, so I grabbed Kate and started to push her through, trying to avoid having her get cut. When she was done, I started crawling through myself. I got cut on my left arm and leg, but didn't stop. Once we were clear of that window, we ran to the car and got inside. Before driving off, I instinctively looked back at the doors, but I didn't see that man. We drove back to the hotel, where we called the cops. They met us there about 15 minutes later, and we explained the situation. Oddly enough, they didn't seem to doubt the part about us being locked inside the bowling alley. Maybe they knew about the guy who worked there and whatever his mental issues were. They told us they'd check it out and let us know if they found anything. We drove to the ER after that and I got stitches, and then we drove back to the hotel. At this point, it was like 1 a.m., and as Kate and I were both pretty tired, we managed to fall asleep rather quickly. We woke up around 9, got our stuff, and then checked out. When we arrived at our friend's house and told him what happened, he was at a complete loss for words. He told us we could have called him or come straight over. Nothing at all eventful happened for the rest of our trip, and we actually managed to have a good time. We did make sure to make the return trip in only one day to avoid having to stop somewhere for the night. At this point, what happened is just a scary story we sometimes tell friends and family, and I think it helped Kate and I stay close even though she was off at college. I still can't help but think about it sometimes, and wonder who that man was, and what he would have done to us if he had caught us. My mom used to work for this engineering firm when I was a kid. I'm not sure exactly what she did there, but the building she worked at was this huge, concrete brutalist structure. It was situated in the middle of this forest, with trails and even a sculpture garden running around the building, and I have vivid memories of going there with her sometimes when she'd take me. Fast forward to the end of my first semester of college at Georgia Tech. I won't go into all of my personal details, but I had just broken up with my first ever long-term girlfriend I'd known since high school, and things weren't going well. So I decided to drive around to clear my head. My parents and I had moved away from that area I mentioned when I was in middle school, but it was only an hour or two away from my dorm, and I figured revisiting some of my childhood memories might help lift my spirits. Therefore, one overcast Saturday morning right after finals, I drug myself out of bed and threw a couple snacks in my Toyota Corolla. For the first part of my journey, I drove with the radio off, just thinking about how things had been going recently. But after an hour or so, my spirits did lift, and I turned the radio on. I had a list of places I wanted to see, including our old house, my old school, and a few stores and other landmarks. While I ended up having a really positive experience seeing them again, they're not really relevant to this story, so I'll skip to the afternoon and the end of the trip. The big concrete building was essentially the last thing on my list, and as I drove down the road winding through the forestry area, I felt a fair number of potholes. As the building came into view, I realized that it was abandoned. Not gonna lie, it brought the feels a bit. However, I also now had a sense of curiosity and wanted to go exploring even more. There was a road/series of parking lots that ran all around the building, so I drove through them, just taking in the scenery. When I was almost back to where I started, I noticed a single car parked in one of the lots. At first I thought that was odd, but then I figured maybe it was just someone who came to walk the trails, or see the sculpture garden, or another explorer like me. Or maybe it was just someone who abandoned their car. When I did one complete circle, I parked and walked over to the building. My curiosity compelled me to check at least one of the doors, which, as I expected, turned out to be locked. I cupped my hands and looked inside, and saw a completely empty reception-type area. I couldn't make out many of the details since it was dark inside and the glass on the windows was tinted, but it didn't look like anyone had broken in and trashed the place. I walked around the outside of the building a bit more, then headed back in the direction of my car towards one of the entrances to the trails. Like the roads and parking lots, there was one big trail that did a loop around the building, but I remembered there were some other trails that went deeper into the forest, including the one that went to the sculpture garden. I wasn't sure exactly where that trail was, so I decided to start walking around the perimeter until I found it. The trails were asphalt, but the ground underneath had eroded and some of the parts had caved in, so I had to watch my step from time to time. It was also overgrown in places, with trees and bushes crowding in from the sides of the trail. Honestly, I think it just added to the atmosphere. Finally, about a fourth of the way around the perimeter, I saw another trail leading off that I believe led to the sculpture garden. I took it, and around 30 seconds later, my suspicion was confirmed when I came to a bridge I remembered walking over as a child. That should have led immediately into the garden, but I didn't see any of the sculptures. It then dawned on me that they had probably been removed. Sure enough, I saw the little concrete pedestal type things now sitting in the overgrown grass on each side of the trail. I still decided to walk around though, just taking in the natural scenery. That's when I saw something in my peripheral vision. Near the end of the garden where the trail came to a dead end, I saw a man. He looked older, like in his 40s or 50s, and appeared to be wearing a denim jacket and gray sweatpants. He was just standing there. The situation caught me completely off guard, and I didn't know if it would be best to wave or just turn around and go. In hindsight, I should have booked it out of there, but instead, I looked fully in his direction and did this big wave thing with my arm. The man didn't appear to move though. I almost thought that he was a statue someone had put in the old sculpture garden as a joke. I just stood there for a moment or two, and then the man started slowly walking towards me. I felt I needed to acknowledge his presence again, so I said something like, "Good afternoon." He didn't say anything, but he did pick up the pace. There was something about how fast he was walking now, and the fact that he wasn't talking that was slightly unnerving. I made one last attempt to make small talk when I said, "I guess they took the sculptures out." But when the man kept approaching and didn't answer, I turned around and started jogging back. I tried to play it off like I was only there to get exercise, and that I wasn't frightened. But by now the man was only like 100 feet away from me. As I periodically looked over my shoulder to see the man remain the same distance behind me, the fact that I was fleeing from an unknown guy in what was essentially the middle of nowhere sunk in. Eventually I started running, and to my horror the man started running too. It was like half a mile back to my car, and when I got there I was completely out of breath. Not even 5 seconds after I got in my car and locked the doors did the man walk directly in front of my passenger side window. I was panicking, frantically shoving my keys into the ignition. The man cupped his hands and pressed his face against the window. Judging from his expression, he was completely nuts. I threw it into reverse and the man lurched forward, almost falling onto the ground. I couldn't care though, and when I put it in drive, I floored it. As the man faded from view, I saw him just standing there, his head looking in my direction. The entire way back, I was still just trying to process what I saw. When I made it back to my dorm room an hour later, I just sat there on my bed. That whole situation made no sense. Had that man somehow followed me without me noticing? Or had he just been waiting at the far end of the sculpture garden to attack whoever might walk up? Did anyone else even visit that place now that the building was abandoned and the sculptures were gone? I've never told anybody else about this encounter, not so much because I doubt they'd believe me, but more so because it's just a really weird experience that I wouldn't want to share without anonymity. However, that burst of adrenaline might have helped me out of my slump, because things turned around next semester. Ultimately, I still don't have the answers, and I doubt I ever will. Though I can't help but wonder, what would that man have done to me if he had caught me? I drive a delivery van for a medical supply company in the American Midwest, and I've done this job for a little over 15 years now. It's pretty much my dream job, as it pays well, my coworkers are nice, and there's a fair amount of downtime. Over the years, I've certainly had my share of odd encounters, which usually included a person with a physical or mental issue saying or doing something bizarre. However, there was one singular experience that was the most terrifying moment of my life. It was also probably the most defining moment of my life too. I still remember it was a Thursday night, a little past 6 o'clock, and I had to deliver 2 oxygen tanks along with the accessories like gauges and valves. The client lived about 2 hours away, which was near the edge of our delivery area. I loaded the equipment into the van, strapped myself in, double-checked the drop-off address, and then set off down the highway. I drive on it frequently, though usually not that far, and as the sun went down, it was actually quite scenic. Personally, I preferred the longer drives, since I could just put on music or a podcast and zone out. Eventually I got to a place I hadn't been before, and as I took the off-ramp onto the crossroad, I saw there weren't any gas stations or shops. We were just in a big forest, which was also now dark. I still had 10 miles to go, and as I continued to drive, it was a bit of a spooky experience. Finally I reached the road which led to the house, and I saw it was only gravel. As I now bumped along down the road, I kept expecting to see other houses pop up in my headlights, but they didn't. Obviously this was a more rural area, but I still figured there'd be at least some other houses on this road. I stopped at one point and double-checked the address again, and sure enough, I was still headed in the right direction. Finally I came up to this one lone house. The house in question was super creepy. It was a small, dilapidated one-story house with debris strewn around what I guess was supposed to be the front yard, though it was just dirt. None of the lights were on. There was a carport with some old rusty beater in it, and garbage bags wedged between it and the house. There were also garbage bags on the front porch, and by the side of the house too. Had I been in a suburban area, this wouldn't have been nearly as scary, but as I was quite possibly miles from the nearest other person, I was on edge. I really didn't want to walk up and knock or ring the doorbell, but of course I had to. I took the flashlight I kept in the van and stepped outside into the cool night air. Upon locking the doors, I was plunged into total darkness, aside from the light from my flashlight. It was even a new moon, so I didn't even have moonlight. I tried my best to listen for any sounds in addition to those of the forest. All I managed to hear were the crickets and other bugs, the wind blowing through the trees, and the gravel crunching under my feet. There wasn't any kind of a walkway, so I just walked up the little gravel driveway and then cut over to the front porch. There was a doorbell, so I rang it. The inside lights came on, and a second later so did the porch lights, which helped to put me at ease. I turned off my flashlight and announced through the door that I was here to deliver 2 oxygen tanks. Initially I was hopeful because I thought I heard footsteps come right up to the other side of the front door, but then it seemed that whoever was there turned around and walked away. That put me back on edge. Then I heard what sounded like someone falling against a wall and then speaking in a muffled voice before the inside went quiet. I waited another few seconds and then asked if the person needed any help. I didn't get an answer, but as I was just about to knock on the door and repeat my request, it opened. On the other side was a tall, skinny, 40-year-old guy with long hair and a mustache. He was wearing a red button-down shirt and khakis. He just stared at me for a moment with this completely blank expression without saying anything, so I greeted him with the name listed for the delivery. He said very matter-of-factly, "Yeah, that's me. Just put the tanks on the porch, thanks." I couldn't help but catch a glimpse of the trash bag sitting inside the house and the stains on the carpet. The whole encounter was extremely off-putting, to say the least, but 2 things really stuck out. First, there wasn't actually any foul odor, either outside or inside the house, and second, the man appeared to be healthier than I expected. For one thing, he wasn't wearing any kind of mask or nasal cannula, which is a thin plastic tube wrapped around the ears and under the nose to deliver oxygen. Therefore, I wasn't sure why he needed those oxygen tanks, though there were other legitimate reasons, such as using oxygen only during a migraine attack. In any case, I just wanted to be out of there and back on the road as soon as possible, but just as I turned to walk back to the van, I heard a noise come from somewhere inside of the house. It sounded like what I heard earlier, when I thought the man fell against a wall, but obviously that couldn't be him now. I was able to hear things a bit more clearly, and and it sounded like someone struggling to move something. That's when the man said, "Excuse me," in kind of a hurry, and closed the door. I thought back to the muffled talking from earlier and put two and two together. My heart sank at the very real possibility that there was someone tied up in that house. I didn't know what to do. Ultimately, I decided to turn my flashlight back on and go back and get the oxygen tanks. My reasoning was that it'd give me time to think and make it seem like I didn't pick up on what was going on. I opened the back of the van and started to take the straps off the tanks and equipment when I thought I could hear a muffled scream. My heart was racing, and each of my feet felt like 1,000 pounds as I forced myself to walk back to the front door. When I got there, I heard the scuffling again, and somehow managed to work up the courage to knock on the door. There wasn't an answer, but the sounds continued. I knew I had a decision to make. I could leave the stuff on the man's porch, then drive away and hide somewhere and call the cops, and hope that whoever was being restrained in that house would still be there and alright by the time the cops arrived. Or I could confront the man then and there. The weight of that decision paralyzed me. When the door still didn't open, I knocked again and called, "I have your tanks." There was another muffled scream, and I knew I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I didn't at least try to help whoever was in there. I was able to push the door open since the man apparently didn't lock it. Then there in the hallway is a scene that will forever be burned into my retinas. The man had his arms around a woman who was gagged and had her hands behind her back. She screamed the moment she saw me, and the man's head shot in my direction. I could only react in that situation, and picked up the box containing the valves and ran at the man. I hit him in the face with it, which distracted him just long enough for the woman to escape his grasp and make a break for the door. I followed her immediately, not wanting to continue the fight in case the man was armed. The woman was running towards the road, in the direction of my van, and I shouted, "In there!" She ran to the passenger side and turned around, trying to open the door with her still tied hands. I got to her and opened the door for her, then ran around to my side and got in and started the van. This entire time the man didn't come outside, and my worst suspicion was confirmed when I saw him finally bolt out of his doorway carrying a shotgun. I can't tell you how much adrenaline was pumping through my veins and how surreal everything felt as I stomped on the gas pedal. I'm not sure exactly how close that man got, but I'm sure we had less than a second to spare. We barreled down the road as I ripped off the woman's gag and handed her my phone to call 911. Her voice was raspy and she was terrified, but managed to relay what happened. Luckily, the road we were on made kind of a loop, and I was able to get back to the road I was on before. I drove back to the highway, all the while dreading seeing a pair of headlights in the rearview mirror and listening to the woman's story. I was trying to concentrate completely on the road, but couldn't help pay attention to certain details the woman was saying. They included the fact that she'd met the man 2 days prior at a bar where he apparently drugged her, and then woke up bound and gagged in his house. I'll spare the other details. The operator advised us to drive back to the highway and wait there until the cops arrived, while continuing to watch for that man if he came after us. I cannot convey in words how paranoid we both were while we waited, and how incredible it felt to see those red and blue lights coming towards us. There were 3 cop cars, and when they parked behind us, 2 cops immediately came up to our windows. The woman opened her door and fell into his arms, while I gave more details of the situation to the other cop. One of the other cars drove off to the man's house, and as we'd find out later, they actually found the man still inside. I guess his car didn't work, or he decided not to run. I told my boss and coworkers the next day, but of course they were beyond speechless. They were also extremely supportive, with my boss telling me I could take as much time off as I wanted to help cope with what happened. But honestly, being on the job with my coworkers and driving around helped my state of mind, so I just continued working. I don't think I ever developed PTSD, or what I imagined PTSD to be like for others. The first week after this happened, I was definitely on edge, but after a month or 2, I settled into my old routines, much like I had been before. I testified at the man's trial, and he ended up going to prison for 15 years. I'm not sure what happened to the woman after that, but she said she'd be eternally grateful for rescuing her, and told me that if I ever needed anything, to not hesitate to contact her. I never ended up doing that, and I have no idea what happened to her after the trial ended. Wherever she is, I hope she's doing well. I do still think about what happened, usually on a daily basis, and sometimes when I replay the events in my mind, I'm still not sure how I managed to find the courage to enter the man's house and confront him. Deep down, I feel bad that I considered running away and leaving a helpless human being behind with their kidnapper, and I know I'm not the hero I was supposed to be. Ultimately, I'm just glad I could help the woman escape.